The Long Way Home, Chapter 31, Coiled. The swirling colors of the hyperspace sea vanished in a flash of white light as the long way translated into real space once again, emerging in a barren system of uninteresting rocky bodies orbiting an inhospitable star. Vincent nodded and began running calcs for the next short 10-minute jump, while his co-pilot cadet eyed him in the way the boy did when he had a question to ask. Another flash of light later, and the view screen was filled with the chaotic colors of the long way's hyperdrive bubble of reality colliding with the ravages of hyperspace once again. When the 10-minute trip through hyperspace was up, and Cadet still had yet to voice his question, the old man ventured to probe. "What's up, son?" "Shouldn't we be heading to the big current that you and Jason were talking about?" "Yeah," Vincent said as he ran the calcs for yet another 10-minute jump. "But we don't want the enemies to be nipping at our heels." "Does this really work?" "When I track pirates, this trick sure annoys the hell out of me," Vincent scoffed. "It's honestly a little fun to be on this end of it." "You going to keep hunting pirates when we get back?" Now it was Vincent's turn to sit in silence as he tried to find the right words. It wasn't until the flash of translation back into real space that he finally answered. "I don't think so. I'll find something to do, something that lets you have the rest of your childhood, something that doesn't take me away to distant stars, or at least lets you come along." Cadet clicked his beak and otherwise sat in silence as the long way made yet another translation into hyperspace. Then he abruptly asked, "Am I allowed to be a Catholic like you?" Vincent was more than a little taken back, and he laid his ears back as he thought before he said, "Well, sure, I decided to be Catholic. It's not like you're born one." The long way's ever-present droning hum filled the silence between them until Cadet pressed, "I want to be more like you, like the you that you think is good, if it makes sense. How do I do that?" "Well," Vincent began, "for that, we'll need a church and a priest. And you start out by saying you want to become a Catholic. Then you go learn about the history of the church, the tenets of the faith, how the rituals go and what they mean, that sort of thing. After that, you participate in the initiation ritual we call baptism. And that's wrapped up in a couple of other important ceremonies. I started out when I was pretty young, too. And I didn't decide that I'd really be a Catholic until I was a man grown. You have lots of time to figure out what you think of the faith." "Oh," Cadet said softly. "Can't you teach me any of that stuff?" "I can do my best," Vincent grumbled. "You just have to be patient with me." "I remember," Cadet answered with a twinkle in his eye. "Not good at talking, kind of like me." A week had passed since the long way and a crew's harrowing escape from the Grub Controller's breeding facility, and Jason was anxious to snatch up at the brief freedom they'd have dirtside. It had been a short jump, relatively speaking, to get them into position to ride the fastest available current leading in Rimwood, which had Jason more anxious than ever to escape the cozy confines of his temporary home with his recent familial additions and his friends to just enjoy the open air. He flexed his left arm, twisted it, waggled his fingers in the most complicated motions he could think of, and grinned at how normal it felt outside, and his arm wasn't broken anymore. In all of his 12 years, Jason hadn't ever thought that he'd look forward to getting off a ship quite this intensely. But then again, the Among the Startides We Sing was a spacious vessel, even now, nearly a century and a half since her keel was laid. On the other hand, he'd never be caught complaining about the long way's tight quarters, or her lack of amenities he'd been used to enjoying, if not taken for granted. She was a stout ship, after all. "You look happy," Vi remarked from where she was preparing a simple breakfast of oatmeal, which Jason didn't even frown at since he was in such a good mood. "Aye," Jason agreed, "and I'm feeling like I could spend a half hour on the heavy bag, too." "You did promise Tran that you wouldn't do that until at least—" She scolded him, but he cut her off. "Until at least a week after the splint came off," Jason said with a widening smile. "Guess what day it is?" Vi laid her rounded ears back and her whiskers drooped in displeasure. She said, "Jason, please." "I'll leave the punching bag until tomorrow," Jason said with a placating wave in Vi's direction, before he tossed himself on the sofa bodily and asking, "Do you know what our time to translation is?" I'm not sure," Vi said carefully. "Maybe an hour? I think Mr. Vincent will want to have one of his meetings to plan out our stop when we get close." Jason nodded his agreement before he asked, "Where's everybody else? You need help with the washing up?" Tran said she had an idea and went down to the engine room to make something. Isis Magdalene is in our room sewing something for us girls, and Mr. Vincent is with Cadet in the cockpit. "What about the washing up?" "Well, sure, if you want to. But you better eat your breakfast. I know you don't like oatmeal, but, well..." Jason didn't hesitate to say, "I know, and I will." It was at that moment that Tondre clambered up the ladder from the engine room, muttering, "I don't know why I didn't think of this sooner." "Think of what sooner?" Jason asked, as he deliberately leaned his weight on his left fingertips on the sofa's armrest to revel in the total absence of pain. "Just something I should have done ages ago," she answered sheepishly, as she waved a pastel pink something in one of her hand. "I'll explain when everybody gets here. Oh, oatmeal. I think we have some canned cream left." Jason waved a hand dismissively and said, "I wasn't going to complain, even if oatmeal belongs in cookies." "Bleh," Tondre said, as she stuck her tongue out in disgust and slid into the dinette ahead of Jason, springing to his feet to take his customary spot between her and Vi. Once he had, she continued, "Oatmeal cookies are an abomination made to cause unwary chocolate chip-loving normal people suffer." "Or you could just use your eyes and notice that oatmeal raisin cookies look different," Jason teased, as Vi carefully slid the final 2 bowls of oatmeal on the table before she took her seat. Meanwhile, the door to the girls' cabin opened as Isis Magdalene joined them, calling to the other 2 girls. "I think that I shall have these patterns well ready for fitting in a week or so. We must think seriously about what colors we should like the finished garments to be." Then noticing Jason, she noted that he was wearing the embroidered eye patch she had made, and a brief pleased smile flashed across her face before a thoughtful cast came over her as she said, "And we should plan on something for the boys to wear as well." "Boys' fashion is so much boringer," Vi complained as the hatch to the bridge cycled, and Cadet and Vincent, too, joined them. "What do we need fashion for?" Cadet asked with a disdainful ruffle of his feathers as he too slid into his customary place in the dinette. "Usually because girls like it when we dress nice," Vincent said as he eased himself into the end seat. Then, with a deep sigh, the old man said, "All right, crew. You know the score. We're going to take long jumps, and this will be our last long stop until we're good and back. Still, we'll only be there 2, maybe 3 hours. Let's unwind as much as we can, gather up what supplies we can find, but we're not taking any chances." "Oh, about that," Tondre said as she placed 4 pastel plastic teddy bear head-shaped plastic devices on the table, 2 blue and 2 pink. "I should have thought of this sooner, and if I did, I would have made them look less babyish." "Them what?" Isis Magdalene asked as she curiously picked one up. "Radios," Jason exclaimed with recognition. "Tran, that's a great idea." "That I should have, well, I found it in the preloaded programs in the printer. They're pretty short range, and they look pretty dumb, but at least we can keep in contact a little better. I can design stronger transmitters and receivers and a less dumb housing for another set later. But I didn't have the time." "It's a good idea," Vincent agreed. "But I still want to have teams. None of you have a reason to go off on your own, and I don't plan on going on a hunt. Not enough time." "Aye, Captain," Jason agreed. "No wandering off. Me and Tran, Vi and Isis Magdalene, and Cadet with you." "And Cadet should get one of the radios anyway, since he can fly," Vi noted as she tapped her spoon on the rim of a bowl. "Any chance of swimming down there?" "We need to take on water, so I'll be looking for a good lake or river anyway," Vincent said to Vi, and to Jason he said, "That sounds pretty good. We'll stick together and stick close." One breakfast and translation into real space later, and Vincent was guiding the long way through the upper atmosphere of another nameless world, while Cadet read the scanner readouts for the largest body of fresh water, dense vegetation, and signs of large fauna. The boy tapped on his console with his wing claws, and a HUD appeared across the view screens to direct them to a landing site. The old man began to think about banking for his approach, but then said, "Take the stick and put us down easy." "Really?" Cadet asked with an eager light behind his eyes. "Really. Today's our last chance for a lot of things, and this is one of them. Besides, you should at least know what piloting in Atmo is like compared to in the void. It's more like flying and less like sailing, if that makes sense." Cadet let out a happy sound somewhere between a chirp and a throaty clicking, and took up the yoke in his wing claws. The long way promptly shuddered as he was buffeted by turbulence, and the boy narrowed his eyes in focus to correct his angle to align with the suggested landing trajectory. "It's hard to, I can't feel the wind in my feathers," he muttered, as he began to circle a sparkling clear inland lake for his final approach. The boy took the old yacht in a wide, shallow spiral, sweeping over the drooping trees as their long branches swayed and danced in the breeze. Over the shore, where gentle waves lapped at the soft band of sand, over a stark outcropping of igneous rocks jutting out in the lake from beneath the world's verdant turf, like a prow of an ancient ship. On his last pass, the long way sent leaves and twigs spinning away from the trees closest to the rocky outcropping, where he activated the ship's automated landing and let go of the yoke with a satisfied nod. Vincent concealed a proud grin and said, "It takes a while to get a feel for it. Most pilots start in Atmo, then go to Void Point. I hear it's a little harder to go the other way.
Is it?
I don't know, for my part. I started in the void back when... but that was several different lives ago, Vincent said with a little wistfully.
Weren't you a farmer before you were a pirate hunter?
Yeah, but I wasn't always a farmer either, Vincent grunted. Before I got married, I was in Her Majesty's Royal Space Navy.
I thought there wasn't a queen in the CIP, Cadet said, confused.
There isn't, but some planets in the Coalition have kings or queens. My planet shares a queen with something like 12 others by now.
Why?
For New Montreal ceremony, mostly. The queen has some authority, but she doesn't use it much, Vincent explained offhandedly.
Could you be the king? Cadet pressed.
If any idiot ever made me king, I'd quit, and they'd have to find a new one, Vincent scoffed, then mused. The chief and I have that in common. The Longway shook as she settled on her landing gear, and Vincent stood up to stretch while Cadet asked,
Why?
Well, I just don't want to boss people around, Vincent said before he reached down to help Cadet out of his co-pilot's seat.
Don't you boss us around?
I didn't think so, Vincent muttered with apprehension.
Well, you tell us to do things sometimes, and you decide where the Longway sails, don't you?
I guess, Vincent reluctantly agreed. But I don't think that's quite like being a king. She's my ship, and I know what you can do best, and I don't exactly tell you what to do. I don't think so anyway.
You do, Cadet said. It's just when you say to do something, it's a good idea to do it. Jason's the same way sometimes. I tried, just not to do what he said when you first met, but, you know how he is.
Stubborn, Vincent agreed.
Kind,
Cadet corrected. Yeah, stubbornly kind. Come on, let's get some fresh air while we can.
Sounds like a good idea, Cadet chimed.
Jason very responsibly resisted the very real temptation to dive into the lake below as he stood at the edge of the stone bluff upon which Cadet had landed the long way. He drew in a breath to fill his lungs. The air smelled like pine and water. It was crisp, cool, nearly alpine, and if it wasn't for the light gravity, this would make for a fine colony world. Maybe one of the Xeno nations would want it. The clear, sparkling water looked deep enough for a dive, and inviting at that. But one broken bone was more than enough to give the boy pause at leaping into the air over the water. Jason let out his held breath and found that an easy half smile had fixed itself to his face. He decided it fit his mood and said to Trundray, Well, how about you and I go looking for something edible? Cadet shot by between them as an azure blue before he dove off the high bluff without so much as a glance at either of them. Jason followed his descent as he spread his wings, caught the air, and skimmed the tips of the little waves made by the light breeze with his talons before he beat his wings to climb in a wide circle around the sparkling water of the lake. Trondre muttered in a poor imitation of bitter jealousy. You and Uncle Vincent can drink coffee. Vi swims in the water like a freeze-fall, and you can do that. Life isn't fair. Jason gave her a one-arm shrug and repeated, Should we start looking for vegetables? It looked like she was going to answer him, but Vi scampered between them, calling, Isis Magdalene and I are going down to the shore this way. Once again, Jason's cousin was delayed in her answer when Isis Magdalene strode between Trundray, calling to Vi, There's nothing like a bath, but take care where you step. Trondre looked one way, then the other. Then she peered at the long ways loading ramp suspiciously before she said, let's go with Vi and Isis Magdalene just to be close by if they need help. Good idea, Jason agreed. Then he took his cousin by the hand and strode towards the trees, just as eagerly as his young companions had. However, he shrugged the straps suspending the old R&I surplus boarding shotgun into a more comfortable position, and let his right thumb run along the carven deer horn scales of Kel's old knife, as if checking that his tools of violence were still there. It turned out that Isis Magdalene wasn't right. There was a path, nothing made by a sapient mind, but it was clear that some kind of animal, something almost as wide as Jason's slim shoulders, had a need to travel up or down the hill between the bluff and the sandy lake shore. However, whatever it was, Jason didn't see any recent sign of it passing. Even so, he began to peer into the trees to scan the forest floor and lift his gaze to check for any creatures that might be lurking above head. When he didn't find anything like a threat, he glanced towards the shore where Vi was diving into the clear water with as little hesitation as when Cadet had taken flight, and Isis Magdalene was turning something over in her hands. Jason patted his pocket where Trundre's radio rested and nodded to himself before he released his cousin and said, You have the TOC scanner. You decide where we go. Trundre wasted no time in immediately scanning small plants in the underbrush, all the while muttering, No, until she found something edible, pulled it, roots and all, from the ground, and said, These are edible. She paused to do a scan of the tuber-like root cluster and concluded, And the root is a calorie dense. "I'll look out for more of those," Jason said, as she and he began to pick their way between the trees, all the while keeping the shore in sight between the trees. Jason's pocket chirped with Vincent's voice asking Cadet to help with the hoses. The breeze stirred, and the small, round-leaved on their propy, swaying branches, but the woods were otherwise quiet. Jason found that he missed the long ways hum filling the silences like this one. "It's been a month and a half, and you haven't talked about it," Trandre remarked bluntly. "Talked about what?" Jason evaded as he plucked one of the plants from the loose soil. "You know what, Jason, don't be ornery with me. You haven't talked about what you went through in that fight with Uncle Vincent, or me, or anyone." Jason noted that she wasn't speaking commercial English, but seafarer's negotiation. So he replied in kind. "I'm regulating." "Aye," Trandre agreed. "But how well? How much is a front to keep Vi Cadet and Isis Magdalene from worrying?" Jason lifted a drooping branch aside and peered off into the shadowy woods before he turned to regard Trandre's patiently concerned expression to say, "I don't know how much is a front. I really care about them, Tran. I don't want them to fret over something they can't help." "What about me?" Jason watched her. He just watched her as she stood motionless and waited. Jason didn't detect any expectation, nor pressure, nor worry, which was of course unfair since it denied him any excuse to resist. "Jerk," he muttered under his breath before saying flatly, "They were dead already." "Aye, they were." "And screaming inside their own heads." "Aye, they were that too." "They would have killed or taken Isis Magdalene, and I had an oath to keep." "Aye, and your honor." "So I killed them. They were dead already, but I killed them. I had to. And I killed them," Jason said, as he blinked tears away from his eyes, and his voice cracked under the strain that he had carefully hidden. "Aye, and you stand here, honor intact, friend preserved, but wounded still," Trandre said softly. "I love you." "And I'm here too." "Aye," Jason said, as he furiously rubbed his eye in a futile attempt to stem his tears. "I know." "And do you want a hug?" Trandre interrupted. Despite Jason's surprise at the rare offer of physical comfort from his cousin, and his knowledge that she found that very thing difficult, he threw his arms around her and drew her into a tight embrace, and with no further attempt to stem the tears. The kids hadn't wasted any time in taking advantage of the brief freedom Vincent could offer them before their sprint against the impending invasion. He couldn't blame them. He didn't even think of blaming them. On the contrary, he was pleased to see their youthful energy in the face of the perils they'd faced, and the staggering weight that their journey home had taken on. Privately, only privately to prevent any unnecessary head-sweating, Vincent was proud of them. He looked out over the lake, where Cadet was pulling the hose out to the center of the lake, and relaying his request to Vi to check under the surface to make sure that the end wouldn't suck up any debris or water critters. He let out a proud grin creep across his face, and found that expression wasn't as unfamiliar as he'd feared. Once they had completed their task, Cadet performed an aerial pirouette to once again climb to a height where he could ride the planet's gentle currents while Vi dove into clear water to the lake's bed where she seized what looked like some kind of crustacean, just without anything like claws. She hauled her prize to the shore where Isis Magdalene waited with a large tote bag, into which the prize was deposited before she rocketed out into the lake just beneath the surface once again for further prey. Meanwhile, Isis Magdalene critically examined a smooth stone in her hands before she placed it in a small outside pocket of the tote bag before she scanned the shore for more of whatever she found interesting about the stone. Though Vincent peered into the trees, he could only catch glimpses of the chief and Trandre as they moved amongst the trees just beyond the sand of the shoreline, plucking plants from the ground. Altogether, the sight did him good. It did an old man so much good that he stood there for a time and simply watched. He watched Cadet's joyful soaring, Vi's industrious diving, Isis Magdalene's inscrutable search, and the glimpse of Chief and Trandre's diligent labor for nigh on half an hour. Vincent's hand found its way into his pocket. He'd planned on going back inside for this, or perhaps stepping out past the tree line. However, here, with his responsibility and joy under his eye, he decided to begin. His callous fingers still remembered the halting knife marks Cal's original carving had once left on the crude crucifix. Long years of devotion since he'd received the gift and worn them away. But there are things that a father remembers down to the very bones. He drew his rosary out from his right hand and made the sign of the cross over the air before him, the lake, the forest, the sky, and the children all filling his vision, and began to prepare his soul for the long, desperate sprint ahead. I believe in God, the Father Almighty, creator of heaven and earth, and in Jesus Christ, his only Son, our Lord. Once he had finished the Apostles' Creed, the crucifix slid beneath his fingers as he gripped the first of the large beads after the crucifix and proceeded to pray the first Our Father of praying the full rosary. He kept at the fore of his thoughts his need for his humble little yacht to be fleet, for his meager courage and wisdom to hold, for what was left of the children's innocence to be protected. Not far behind that jumbled thought was the billions of innocent people who unwittingly depended on him and on his ability to get these children home safely. Even so, unbidden came ever-present plea to forlorn hope for Cull. Each of the sorrowful mysteries seemed to ease his burden and fortify his strength. And at the final amen of his ritual, he glanced up into the open sky. He would not fail. Not again. Not these kids. End of chapter. I'd quickly like to thank our Tier 5 channel members, Casper Arnholt, John Creighton, Manatharia, 050, Dragzoon WRE, and Elijah Silvercross. Thank you very much.